Hello, and welcome on board Rawabi Integrity. In today's safety video, you will be instructed about the use of CO2 fixed systems. Here, you will learn about the following. What is CO2? Purpose and applications. Regulations. Where are my vessels, machinery, spaces, and flammable liquid lockers? Entry procedure. Equipment diagram. Activation procedures. Communications procedures. Special situations. Maintenance procedures. Let's start. What is CO2? Carbon dioxide, CO2, is a colorless, odorless, non-conductive gas that is heavier than air. In fire suppression, it works by displacing oxygen in the protected space, lowering the oxygen concentration to a level that cannot sustain combustion. CO2 purpose and application. Smothers the fire by removing oxygen. Is effective on Class B flammable liquids and Class C electrical fires. Used for engine rooms, pump rooms, and cargo holds, especially for flammable liquids or gases. Non-damaging to machinery, electrical equipment, and cargo. Fast discharge that can quickly control fires before they spread. Is effective in enclosed spaces where the gas can reach the required concentration. Important. CO2 is highly effective, but also is dangerous to personnel. Not suitable for occupied spaces unless personnel can evacuate quickly, as CO2 displaces oxygen, posing an asphyxiation risk. So always remember, evacuate and close the space before release. Sound the alarm before activation. Follow the ship's fire safety operational booklet and training drills. Regulations. SOLAS Chapter 2, Regulation 1, 0.4.1.1. For cargo ships of 500 GT and above, machinery spaces of Category A shall be protected by one of the following fixed fire extinguishing systems. A fixed CO2 fire extinguishing system. A fixed high-expansion foam system, a fixed water mist, water spray, or equivalent system approved by the administration, meaning your vessel must have a fixed firefighting system for the engine room. CO2 is the most common choice because it's effective, quick, and space-efficient. SOLAS Chapter 2, Regulation 10.6.3. For paint lockers or other flammable liquid storage spaces. Paint lockers shall be protected by a fixed fire extinguishing system approved by the administration. The system may be CO2, foam, or dry powder. Meaning, all paint lockers on board must have a dedicated fixed system activated from outside the space to deal with potential paint or solvent fires. Where are my vessels, machinery spaces, and flammable liquid lockers? On board Rawabi Integrity, we have the following machinery spaces. Main engine and from generators 1 to 4 are covered by our CO2 fixed system. Generators 5 and 6 are covered by water mist, and this will be covered in another video. Generators 7 and 8 are covered by our CO2 system. Emergency generator is also covered by our CO2 system. Regarding to the paint locker, it is also integrated in our CO2 room system. This 4 integrated CO2 system can be automatically activated from the CO2 room. CO2 room. Entry procedure. The CO2 room is located on main deck port side aft. By the engine room emergency exit, and next to the old LQ access door on the left side. Before entering, you must make sure ventilation is on. Make sure ventilation fan is on, and both fire flaps are open for proper air circulation. Avoiding this step could be fatal in case an accidental CO2 gas leak exists inside CO2 room. That's why you should never attempt entering the CO2 room without ongoing ventilation. The CO2 room should be always locked, and the chief engineer is responsible for the key. Bridge and this key box contains spare keys in case of emergency. Remember that the CO2 room must always be locked for safety reasons. CO2 room, equipment and diagram. Inside the CO2 room, you will find the following components that work together in order to deliver CO2 to machinery spaces. Let's start with the CO2 cylinders that safely store the CO2 gas. Then is the CO2 main line, which is the set of pipelines and valves that once opened, CO2 will be released from the cylinders and transferred to the designated areas through the pipelines. In addition, there is also a pneumatic system, which is a set of valves and pipelines that are responsible for the opening of all CO2 cylinders and pipe valves. Once activated from the activation panel, this pneumatic mechanism will trigger a pilot cylinder that provides the necessary force to open the pneumatic valves and the CO2 cylinders, causing the CO2 to flow through the main CO2 line as quickly as possible. Other important elements are the communication system from which you can receive instructions from the bridge, and also a testing panel for testing the visual alarms and other electrical elements. And finally, the mechanical systems that serves as backup for all the pneumatic valves in case of a sudden, unexpected failure.
In our integrated CO2 room, the arrangement can be explained in the following way. For the paint locker, there is one designated CO2 cylinder that can be released independently with its own separate line by pneumatic activation. Next comes 7 cylinders for the emergency generator and generators 7 and 8. 3 cylinders are designated for the emergency generator, and the other 4 will be designated for generators 7 and 8 room. They also come with its independent pneumatic lines for automatic activation.
Similarly, for the main engine, there are 123 cylinders lined up into the main CO2 main line, along with its independent pneumatic activation lines as shown in the diagram.
The activation panels for each of the 4 areas are next to the pilot cylinder, from which activation can be done independently for activation. However, they all share the same main CO2 line. This means that we can activate more cylinders if required, as long as we do the right lineup for the specific area we need to deliver CO2. To finalize, the electric panel, communication panel, and mechanical valves can be found in the CO2 room as per this diagram. CO2 room. Activation procedures. The activation process follows the same pattern like the others. The only thing that changes is the area on which you need to deliver CO2 and the set of cylinders that will be opened. That's why it is very important for you to be aware and know this system very well in case you are required to assist in an emergency. By the entrance of the CO2 room, you will find the pilot cylinder next to 3 activation panels. For example, in case of a fire in the paint store, first we need to select the respective activation panel for the paint locker. As we know, this will only activate one CO2 bottle. And also we need to know which pneumatic valve must be open for CO2 to flow directly towards the paint locker. Once you have the confirmation that the area is evacuated, you can flood the area with CO2 by opening the pilot cylinder valve. Then open the activation panel. This will activate a sound alarm that alerts personnel to evacuate the zone.
Let's recap. First, you need to open the pilot cylinder valve in order to pressurize the system with air. Then, proceed to open the activation panel of the designated space you need to flood with CO2. Once opened, the alarm will sound, and then you only need to open the valve inside the activation panel in order to start the CO2 system. Please make sure before opening this valve that you got authorization from the bridge, master or chief engineer in order to open this valve. Afterwards, check for the area valve and make sure it's open. In case of doubt, there are instructions posted and available for you to read if needed. And for last, double check if all CO2 cylinders were activated. Communications. Inside the CO2 room, there is a cytophone from which you can communicate with the bridge to confirm the status of the situation and receive all the instructions from the person in charge during the emergency. To call, select the number for the bridge station and turn the cytophone lever fast and wait for reply. Similarly to VHF radios, you need to press the handheld button in order to talk or transmit your message. Special situations. In case there is a failure in the pneumatic system, we can also open the valves using the mechanical system by just pulling the levers up to open up the designated area we want to cover with CO2. And also, in the event of failure from CO2 cylinders not opening. Our cylinder have two types of mechanism. Then there are two mechanical ways to do this. One way is by pulling this lever down. And the other way is by using this red lever to activate mechanically the rest of cylinders. Now, in case there is a situation in which access to the CO2 is dangerous or not available for any reason, we have an alternative CO2 activation room in boat deck port side aft. From here we can activate for both engine room and paint locker. CO2 room. Maintenance procedures. For testing the sound and visible alarms, we must check the electric panel. There are several switches for every independent station for you to check visually, and also by VHF confirmation if sound alarm is being heard in the engine room spaces, for example. Chief engineer do this test in a monthly basis. The pressure test is made by taking air from the service line to pressurize the whole system. Monitor the pressure gauge until it reaches the right pressure. By opening this valve, the air will pressurize the system, and you can identify by sound if there are leaks present. This test is performed quarterly in order to guarantee that the system is sealed and no CO2 gas will leak out. Since any CO2 leaks inside the CO2 room could be fatal for personnel activating the system.
For last, this pneumatic hose is to perform the hydrostatic test for the system, usually carried out during the dry dock maintenance jobs.
We hope you have learned the importance of the CO2 system on board and how to proceed in case of an emergency. Feel free to consult this video anytime you need to. This video will be available in the crew computer for everyone to access it. Now please proceed to the safety officer or your department head for a knowledge check of the key items of this video. Thanks for watching, and have a safe day.